Hello and welcome to another live mastering workshop with myself, Christopher Carvalho, of Unlock Your Sound. Hope you're all well. Thank you very much for coming on. And so yeah, basically what I'll do is I'll get started right away, and any questions that come up along the way, I'll answer them for you in the short. I'll either answer all of them at the end, or I'll sort of answer them along the way, depending on how we get on. If you're here, I assume you followed through the wrong link thing. Sorry about that. I made the wrong link using the wrong type of stream and something like that. So apologies, but glad that you made it here. So I'm just going to take a few more moments just to, because I know a few people are coming on, just to come on and get going. Okay, I'll get started in just a moment. Just bring it up on the watch page. I need to make sure that I mute that, of course. Yep, it's already muted. Okay, that looks fine. Thanks for your patience. I'll get started in just a sec. Okay, so I'll get started and then I'll take some questions if there are any. So here is another client master that I'll be deconstructing today. Another one from my good friend Gerald Duchan of Antiquity Music over in Brooklyn. This is something that he released recently, something I mastered for him, and the song is called Live Forever, featuring Justine Hall on vocals. So let's have a quick listen to it, just to get to know it a bit. Hope that's coming through all right for you guys. Hi John, good to see you. I'm glad that thing was clear enough for you. John, if you could just let me know that the audio is fine, you can hear me, you can hear the music, that'd be great. Thank you. Hey Phil.
Your smiling face on an old yellow card are times of joy, never seem so hard. Like a word never spoken, love so bold, a look never given, the time has told. This life with each other has much to say, so little time to help find our way. What if I said we could live forever? Our wild notions and dreams to remember. And in my mind a voice is young and old. They pull and push me to heights untold. And yet I cannot move and I cannot speak like the dead without motion so bleak. Or what if I said we could live forever? We could always be a part of each.
Cool, so great song. Hi guys, so good to see you here. If you could just confirm that the audio is fine, you can hear my voice and you can hear the music. I'll assume that you can for now. Okay, I'll carry on. So I'm just going to unpack this master a bit, just like I have done with the other masters in the previous streams, and explain what I did, why I did it, and basically the same as before, and I'll take questions. Okay, so what I have on my chain here, I've got gain, I've got TDR, slick EQ, love that thing, and virtual bus compressor rack from Slate. Yep, got that. That wasn't in any of the previous streams, so it's not normal that I use that one. And Slate FGX once again, my gain limiter if you like, and then once again my adaptive limiter for true peak ceiling, and then my -1 gain stage at the end. Okay, cool, that's good to know. Thank you, Phil. So let's work forwards on the chain. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to load up my load up the EQ that I've got here, and I'm just going to toggle the bypass on it as we listen through the mix, or the master if you like.
And if I said we could sleep forever, I would always be next to you, my treasure. We could romance and love one another and live forever, live forever. Secret reasons heaped high upon the pyre. Love script is stored just for your desire. Sweet little memories are wrapped up in time. Life drifts on and on as it finds the rhyme. Every road in my heart is a road back to you, never taken. Dark, winding, and true.
Okay, so just like with most EQ movements in the mastering process, very, very, very subtle, very subtle adjustments. So what we've got here is a high shelf. I decided on -1.3 dB. In the middle here, around the 2.5k mark, I decided on a -1.5 decibels. And on the low, I made no adjustment. There's also some EQ saturation, which I implore you to read more about in the documentation of this plugin, which actually might not be, from memory, actually, it might not be in usage right now, actually, because it has a linear outstage. I'll have to double check that. However, my intentions were just to flatten out the frequencies a bit to my ear, which is the difference that I hear when I toggle the bypass of this EQ. Just slightly flatter now, now that I've done that EQ, to my ears at least. The before, just a little bit more loose in terms of its frequency spectrum. Now it sounds a bit more, and I don't really like this word that much, but radio ready, you know, in terms of its flatness. So yeah, that was entirely the purpose of this me using this equalizer. I could have used another one like TDR Nova, a more advanced one, but sometimes I like to assume the most simplest solution and use the simplest tool to get the simple jobs done. Especially when there's no, sometimes I like to just look at, you know, knobs on here, you know, as opposed to, you know, a graphic user interface. What I also like about this, much like the TDR Nova, is that it has an auto gain stage on the output, based on relative loudness. So if you make an adjustment on one of these here, it compensates the relative loudness, or if you like, the perceived loudness of the output, so that you don't have to automatically do that. Sometimes I do it myself though, if I'm not that confident that it's doing it right, but more often than not, it does a really, really good job. So yeah, very simple EQ movement using the TDR VOS Slick EQ. Really simple, really nice, easy to use equalizer. It also has these different settings here, which slightly adjust from memory. They slightly adjust the frequency ranges or the quality factors of the EQs, if I remember correctly from reading the documentation. But sometimes I just flick through them and land on the one that I think sounds most appropriate. Sometimes I don't bother if I've already solved the problem. I'll take questions about that actually. Yeah, so it's off. Yeah, I wasn't too sure. So thanks for confirming that, John. Um, it confused me at first, and then I read up about it, and then I forget. But I don't usually use it for saturation. I find that I have to push it really, really hard to get much saturation out of it. So when I want saturation, I tend to use a Slate, what do you call it? The tape, what do you call it? Virtual tape machine, the VTM of Slate. So yeah, thanks for confirming that, John. But any questions about EQ? But like I said, it's really, really simple. It's really, really simple, but the trick, the strategy is to always level match your output. If you don't have an auto thing, you'll have an output gain on your equalizer, like Logic's equalizer has it. You know, if I just switch over to Logic's channel EQ, for example, I would be adjusting the output gain so that when I toggle the bypass, they are of the same loudness, so that I can be objective in what I did, about what I did. What would be the most you'd adjust EQ? Okay, so I think the answer to that question, Phil, is how further would I go before I decided that it was actually a mix issue? To answer your question with another question, or to expand on that question, because that's effectively what it is. It depends. It wouldn't be there. I couldn't tell you a number. I could only tell you in the context of a master. I'll go, this is too much because it's because EQ in the mastering stage is a broad stroke thing. You can't just EQ an instrument. You can't just turn up the vocal in the master, because the timbre of the vocal will be overlapping with the timbre of other instruments in the frequency spectrum. There'll be lots of overlap. Too much EQ is when I'm trying to fix something in the mix, but because of the limited nature of mastering, if it's compromising too much of other elements in the mix, that's when I decide that that's too much, or that is the most, if you like. No, I don't at all. Not at all. I base it. The question being, do you base any of your EQ movements on spectrum analyzers? No. I'll tell you how I feel about analyzers. Analyzers help me validate things that I hear, not the other way around. Analyzers don't tell me what I hear; they just validate what I hear. If that makes sense. If I'm like, sometimes I'm like, oh, is that too crushed? And then I look at a DR meter and it's like, 2 DR dynamic range, and I'm like, yeah, that confirms my suspicions, but it's never the other way around, if that makes sense. I just listen to it, and sometimes I'm not too sure, so I'll go into the EQ and I'll experiment a little bit and level match and maybe A/B stuff and go, is this better or not? Did it need it? Does it not? Sometimes you have to play to get there, to know. But I would never be motivated solely by an analyzer, if that makes sense. I hope that helps. The problem with spectrum analyzers as well is that, there's peak level, there's average level, there's just different sounds have different timbres, different songs have different instrumentations. When I say flat, I mean equal to my ear. I mean balanced to my ear, not flat, if that makes sense. I hope that helps answer that question. Otherwise, I'll move on to the next thing. Okay, I'll come back if there's any further question on that. So the next thing that was on my chain was, so let's leave that on. So here is the Slate Virtual Bus compressor rack. Normally when I use a compressor, I only use the red, which is this middle section. But for some reason I loaded the rack, I think maybe because I wanted a bit more options. And to be honest, looking at it, maybe I didn't actually use it that much. Let's have a playback. So it's been a while since I mastered this one. Okay, so what I'm hearing here effectively what I'm using this compressor for is not so much as a compressor but as a non-linear stage, because there's definitely some glow in the mid range when I bring it back onto power. Slate plugins are really good for that, so I'm not really using this as a compressor. There's very minimal activity happening on the gain reduction needles, and my ears are telling me that there is something happening in terms of saturation. I could be wrong about that, but that's what I'm hearing, and I'm happy with it on. So, not really using this as a compressor right now. And to be honest, I could be wrong that there's a saturation element to it, but theoretically, it's an analog model plugin. I'm kind of using it as a channel, if you like. Let's see if you've got any thoughts on that. Yeah, exactly. So I'm not actually using it. I think like I said, I might pull it on and played with it, left it on. But when I'm turning it on, as opposed to off, on here, I'm getting a slight glow, a new glow in the mid range. I'm not sure if that's part of maybe something I've got here, but everything is off basically, you know, because I've got ratio at 1, threshold at 0, maybe grey. I mean, it could be confirmation bias, but I'm pretty sure I hear something. What do you guys think? Yeah, for color. When mastering, do you usually use compressors for cutting peaks in a subtle way, or to make the mix punchier? Sometimes, what I like to do quite often is use the FG Red, which is just the middle section, which you can load up as a single unit, as a standalone. So let's go to audio units, Slate Digital, FG Red. Sometimes what I want is like some snappy punchiness. I love this compressor. It's just hard and snappy. I really enjoy it, and sometimes I'll just bring that to 1.5 and bring the threshold down, and it just snaps. It's awesome. Sometimes I want that if the mix is a bit too loose, a bit too if it's just not punching enough for me. You know, I'm using very subjective terms, but sometimes I'll use that compressor to just kind of make the sound harder, if that makes sense. So kind of what you're saying. I mean, peaks get, I'm pretty happy with the way FGX handles peaks for the most part. It's rare that I really push it, and if I'm really pushing something, if something just wants to go higher, Sometimes I'll work backwards and go, okay, cool, maybe I want to reduce the peaks going into the limiter, and then I'll use a compressor, and I'll probably use FG Red just to tuck the peaks underneath the underneath the limiter ceiling, if that makes sense. So would you use compression mainly for coloration? I don't generally use compression for coloration. I'll normally go to the tape machine for that. But any analog modeled compressor will have a non-linear stage in it. It will saturate by design, because it's modeled on analog. Hey Techlix, it's really good to see you here, man. Yeah, I hope that makes sense. But when I go for a compressor, it's normally to do a compression job, which is to just tuck in the dynamics a little bit, solving a problem. But I don't normally. It's like I said, if I want that hard, snappy sound, I'll go for the FG Red because I love it. But it's generally the only compressor that I use these days, depending. But to summarize that answer, it's not my first thing for coloration. If I want coloration, I can get coloration through like Virtual Tape Machine or Voxengo, what's it called again? Tube thing, for saturation. But sometimes, like using the Virtual Bus compressor rack, unless it's confirmation bias in my brain, sometimes just having that non-linear stage, even though you're not using it as a compressor, just to create very subtle coloration, sometimes just a tiny bit of glow, helps. Any more questions about that? But as you can see, sometimes you have to play like, that Virtual Bus compressor. I probably loaded it for a reason, but then I decided not to use it, at least as a compressor. Sometimes it's not just as simple as I hear it and solve the problem. Sometimes it's like, that could be better, maybe, and then just throw an EQ on it and go, does it work if I push that up and then level match? Sometimes there's a little bit of play in there, a little bit of experimentation, and don't be afraid to do that. Cool. Excellent. Now we move on to level. Okay, I'm having difficulty moving that around right now, but never mind. Let's try that again. There we go. Slate FGX. Now, I'm not a power Slate FGX user. I don't use any of this stuff. Rarely do I, like using these compressors. I know it's on, but the threshold's at 0, ratio is at 1. Again, could be another thing where it is working, but it's not working as a compressor. I don't really know. But I load it up, I turn it on, and I'm just using the gain stage basically here, and because it's a limiter, it's going to limit the peak so I don't clip. That's the purpose of the limiter. But I don't usually play with these other features. I kind of solve those problems earlier in the stage, really, using my own methods. But sometimes, when I first got it, I was playing with these quite a lot, but I don't bother with those now. I just use it as a gain limiter. So yeah, I turned the gain up until it was at the right loudness to my ear. Again, fixed monitoring, all of that good stuff. For anyone who hasn't seen one of these streams before, I use a fixed monitoring level in my studio. So the output of my speakers, the output of my amplifier is always exactly the same, which I calibrated using Spotify. So I know I've internalized what level things should be at. So I just turn this up until the mix sounds like it should do. Like the vocals are there, and the drums are there, and the guitars are there. Like I get there, if that makes sense. Actually, I'm going to take a moment to see if you've got any questions about that, because it is hard to explain, but it's extremely important. Any other compressors that I like? Any other compressors that I like? I quite like Logic's one. It's really resourceful. It has a lot of context in which it could be deployed, and it can solve a lot of different problems. It's got different circuitries available to you, and being able to just click through them just to hear the different types of compression sound once you've kind of got your basic settings down. I think that's a really cool feature. I think it's designed really well, and it works. But to be honest, next month I might have a new favorite compressor, but the compressor that I like is probably the compressor that I'm using at any given point, to be honest with you. I got the Slate subscription a few months ago, and I discovered FG Red, and I was like, that is an awesome compressor. It just has that, it's really hard to describe, but that just hardness to it. Yeah, that's my current one. I suppose it's one of those things. But there are plenty of good compressors out there, but I really don't care about, what the best compressor is. For me, they solve a problem. And if it doesn't solve the problem, then I'll look at another compressor. But for me, I'm very utilitarian about it. Apart from what I said about the FG Red and stuff, but I just think it sounds great. Sorry, probably a very elaborate answer, but any questions? So you limit the peaks until you hear everything. It depends on, the question being, so you limit the peaks until you hear everything. Okay, so I don't limit the peaks intentionally. I turn up gain. I turn up gain using Slate Digital. If I hear distortion, I will back off and solve that problem. But if I don't hear distortion by the time that I've got to that level, then I'm happy. But I don't limit for the sake of limiting. I limit for the sake of gain. If it causes a problem, it causes a problem. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But when I say there, I mean the stuff that's at the front is actually at the front, and the stuff that's at the back I can hear, and it's at the back. It's just at the right level. It's just at the loudness that my brain would expect it to play back if I just hit play on my computer. Does that answer your question, John? So basically, the question being, the stuff that's in your face should be in your face, is in your face, if that makes sense. In the context of this one, she is right there in front of me. It's great. And the other stuff is where it should be in the context of this mix. You might disagree, but the client was happy, and it's been released. Awesome, man. Awesome. Cool. As you probably noticed, my process is really simple. And to be honest, I think mastering is really simple, and it really isn't that much of a dark art. And but at the same time, like all other things in music production, everything is relative to the input. Everything is relative to, if I get a bad mix, or not a bad mix, sorry, a problematic mix, or a mix with a problem, I do my best to solve that problem in mastering. And sometimes that takes really weird techniques, such as like dynamic EQ, which TDR Nova can be a real blessing. But sometimes that part of the mastering service is to say, look, this I need you to low cut that thing, or I need you to turn that thing down, because it's hurting the way that the other thing sits in a mix. That's all part of the service. Okay, I'll just carry on through the rest of the bit, through the rest of the workshop, and then I'll take more questions. Cool. So now that we're at the level, I'm going to close that for now.
on your face tell all there is to know. Good times and bad for all to show. The feel of your embrace brings me to tears.
Okay, so as you can see, I'm using Logic's adaptive limiter. And it's just there. And there's no gain. There's true peak detection on. Okay, but all it's doing is, so the output of Slate FGX is limited at 0 dB full scale. But this is a true peak limiter. Okay, so it's detecting or guesstimating what the intersample peaks would be after conversion to analog, which can often be quite a bit higher than your sample peak level, if you like. So any peaks that happen, they're going to get capped at a true peak ceiling of 0. So let's have a look at that. See, there's not necessarily any reduction happening, but here there was a little bit of 0.4.
Forever, we could always be a part of each other. And if I said we could sleep forever,
And then a little bit here and there.
I would always be next to you, my treasure.
That just guarantees that my output is at 0 dB true peak, as opposed to full scale. A Slate Digital FGX isn't yet an ISP or intersample peak or true peak aware limiter. It's just a full scale limiter or sample limiter. So I have that extra stage on there. It doesn't mean it's doing anything, and it's definitely not doing any extra gain. But when those true peaks do happen, it caps them. And then after that, I have my -1 gain stage. Yeah, I could just do -1 on the adaptive limiter, but I actually like to work with that off. And then once I'm finally happy with everything, I just turn it on, that -1. It's part of my mastering template, and I just turn that -1, so I go from 0 down to -0. So in terms of dynamics and everything, I work up until this, and then it just turns the whole thing down by 1 dB.
We could romance and love one another.
I'll take questions on that, because there might be some questions about that, about true peak and limiting and stuff like that, and why did I use... I mean, I haven't seen anyone else use a -1 gain stage at the end of the chain. Others that I've seen have just done -1 on the limiter. There's no wrong way, but that's how I do it. I'll take any questions on that though. Okay. Maybe not. Okay, that's fine. I'll just carry on, and if you have any questions, I'll answer them. I'm just going to go on to metering now. So I'm just going to turn on 1 meter at a time and just have a look at it.
Another, and live forever, live forever. Equal reasons heaped high upon the pyre. Love's script bestowed just for your desire. Sweet love.
No surprises there, using Klanghelm Vomit. I'm using a very simple RMS mode and with flat frequency weighting. I'm not aiming for anything here. I'm not really that bothered, but I normally find myself in that range. If it was over here, I'd be like, okay, that's good to know. And if it was up here, I'd be like, okay, maybe that's a bit high. But I normally end up in this range here, so there's no surprises there to find that I find myself there. That's testament to using a fixed monitoring level. I increased gain like I showed you earlier in the Slate FGX, and over time, because I use a fixed monitoring level, I just normally end up in the same place, which is great. And that's normally, with the needle just hovering between minus, I think, is that minus 16? Yeah, minus 16 and minus 8. But this is just a VU meter. Very intuitive way to measure relative loudness, and can make a very quick way as well, especially if you're mastering an album. Sometimes whether you're not sure, you can just, go, okay, what's the measure, like you can match the louder parts of each song, to a certain number if you want to. Some people do that. Let's have a look at Yulene.
Little memories are wrapped up in time. Life drifts on and on as it finds the rhyme. Every road in my heart is a road back to you.
Obviously, this integrated figure only started when I hit play, I believe, so it's not fully integrated, but there's no surprises that it ends up at -14 because guess what? I use Spotify to calibrate my monitoring level, so makes sense that it would end up that way.
Never taken, dark, winding, and true.
That's a good meter, and it's free as well, that one. The basic version of VUMT is also free. Let's have a look at span using the stereo mastering setting. Correlation meter looks good as well. Not that. Obviously, it's just, you can click hold here to kind of freeze while it's at and just look at that. You know, that's how I ended up. But again, I got there by ear. You know. But I'm not looking out for anything particular. But if there was like a big spike here, I'll be like, okay, why didn't I notice that? What is that? You know, I'm just looking for weird stuff, you know, but I'm not looking for a particularly completely flat line. I'm just looking for weird stuff or stuff that validates what I already heard. You know, sometimes I'll be like, is it too bright? And then I go here and it's like, boom, like massive brightness. Then I'll be like, yep, I was right. You know? Let's have a look at multimeter. This is Logic's multimeter. God, I love this song. Those snares really crack.
Without motion so bleak. What if I said lines on your face tell all there is to know, good times and bad, for all to show. The feel of your embrace brings me to.
Okay, and a little bit of utility on this. You see here I've got fade in. I used Logic's fade tool, fade mouse tool, and I'll go to the other end and I've got a fade out there as well. Whoops. I normally do that just because why not? I'll take any sort of last questions before I move on to the very final part of this, which is export and Auburn loudness meter. I don't know TechLix, but if there isn't, I would probably look for one. I can't remember if FL supports VST. Maybe someone can help me out on that. I don't really know. Does this mean that you actually limit 1 more dB above the loudness sweet spot? No, it just means that I turn it down using a linear stage. Because remember, the -1 gain is just a linear stage, so it just turns the whole thing down by 1. You know, it's just for headroom, really. I mean, it's an interesting question, but the loud, because I'm only, by doing that -1, I'm only adjusting the relative loudness by 1 dB, but in a linear fashion. So Spotify could turn that up or down, or anyone else could turn it up or down, but the dynamics, you know, the loudness sweet spot is still intact. Like when I say loudness sweet spot, in some ways I don't necessarily mean the absolute loudness sweet spot. The absolute loudness, what I mean is the sound of it. there's a difference between being loud and sounding loud. And I've got it to sounding the right loudness. And then the negative one is just turning it down by one, just to give the platform headroom, or give the whatever it is headroom, if that makes sense. Loudness sweet spot is also dynamic sweet spot, if that makes sense. You could get the Sonic Anomaly Unlimited or Vlad G Limited number 6. Those are free and true peak aware. Thank you very much for that, John. That's really, really good advice. Any further questions before I move on to the last bit? That is a really good question though, John, about the loudness sweet spot. Okay, I'll just move on. So the last bit is, and those who've seen my previous streams know how this works, but it's always good to revisit it. So I click on the, in the context of a single song master, I'm just going to bypass it. I don't know if that makes a difference. That'd be interesting to know. Probably doesn't. In terms of speed of render. I normally just click on the region and then bounce, so Command B in Logic, and unless asked otherwise, it's wave 16-bit 44.1 interleaved, meaning one single stereo interleaved file. It's not like a left file and a right file. And dither, it really doesn't matter which dither that you use, but I've always used this one. I don't even know why. No normalizing on at all, of course. PCM, wave, and that's it. And click OK. And then I just print the master onto the desktop normally, and then I upload it to Dropbox, and then I archive it. So let's do that. Whilst that's bouncing, I'll see if you've got any questions. That's awesome, John. Any more questions while this is bouncing? It's quite useful that the bounce window has appeared in front of the YouTube window. And any feedback at all would be really, really good. You can feedback here now, or you can email me, chris@unlockyoursound.com, or reply to one of the emails that I push out. And any feedback on the emails that I push out and stuff like that. I know I had a little bit of weirdness before with the event thing. I think I've refined that down now, with the calendar stuff and all of that. But if it's too much or too little, any feedback at all would be great. I'm still rolling this out very slowly. It's kind of an invite-only basis. At first I thought I was going to really push it out, but I'm just slowly building it up. Hi Joel, do you measure the whole song when measuring LUFS? I'm actually about to go on to that bit, but I don't aim for a number in terms of PLR number, peak to loudness ratio. Thanks for the feedback on the delay of the stream, John. I'll work on that. Okay, cool, John. Thank you for the feedback on the email thing. With dither, to be honest, I just the dither that I used just now, which is POW number 3, it just, what it does is, from memory, it pushes the noise into the less audible part of the frequency spectrum, so there's just less noise happening, but the noise is still there enough to reduce the truncation distortion. But I really don't care about which dither it is. What you can do is just dither stuff and then bring it back into a new project and then just turn them all up by a lot, by much gain. Be really careful with that, because if you've got a signal in there and you turn it up enough to hear dither, you're gonna just be really, really careful with that. But any dither is fine, in my opinion, as long as you are dithering. I'd rather any dither than distortion, you know? Okay, cool. So, Joel, you'll might get some value out of this bit with regard to peak to loudness ratio, because what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to close Logic. Let's close that. Hopefully it doesn't, for any reason, mess up the stream. And I'm going to open something called Auburn Loudness Meter, which is a free plugin. Oh, it's not even a plugin, it's a free application for Mac and Windows, I'm pretty sure. And here it is. And then I'll just go to Analysis. Oh, look at that. It's already got a previous one, so I'm just going to negate that. And I'm going to go to Plus. Go to Desktop and click on my thing. And this, Joel and everyone else, actually gives me an offline reading of the various loudness units for the master. I like it because it means I don't have to rely on, a plugin inside the door, inside the project. I can just master by ear, print it down, and then check the numbers afterwards. And here we are. I mean, this minus 14.2, that shouldn't be a surprise because I calibrated my monitoring using Spotify so that when, and it happens that when I turn things up to what I think loudness they should be to my ear, it's funny that it does come out at sometimes at minus 14 LUFS because integrated, because that's what Spotify are supposedly normalizing at, according to my measurements. That's what they are, but they don't actually use LUFS, but the replay gain thing that they do use is the equivalent, it would seem, of minus 14 LUFS integrated. But again, it doesn't matter exactly what that number is, because I'm confident that I've mastered it to the right loudness sounding of the material by ear. So yeah, I'm just looking at the numbers now and I'm going, okay, that's minus 14 LUFS. If it was something like minus 20 or minus 2, I'd be like, okay, what happened? Is that okay? Is that the right thing? Did I miss something? Are my monitors working correctly? Is my hearing gone? Or, you know what I mean? It's just there to validate things or point me in directions which I missed or for whatever reason. But I'm not like, oh my God, it's not minus 15 or minus 14 or minus 16, or I read on a blog that it should be minus 12. That's not how it works. But the highest reconstructed peak level / true peak level, that matters to me because that's actually, if it's at 0 or above 0, you're at a higher risk of causing problems further down the line, distortion, clipping, that sort of thing. But to follow up with your question, Joel, the peak to loudness to PLR of this one is 15.2. Sorry, not 15.2. It's what? 13.8? Yeah. Or 12.8. But it doesn't matter to me. I don't, Yeah, exactly. Isn't it funny though? Isn't it funny that I use Spotify and I didn't even look at the numbers or even aim for a number? It just happens that it lands there, Well, it's 13.2, obviously. 13.2 PLR. So, that's it, guys. That is how I mastered this song. And again, it's like I said before, that's how I mastered this song. That's not necessarily how I'm gonna master the other songs. There's obviously a lot of Phil and John, you would have seen by now that there are some usual suspects in terms of plugins that I use, but it doesn't mean that they are necessarily serving the same purpose every single time. and it doesn't necessarily mean that they are solving the same problem every single time. It's just the chain for me is variable, but there is a kind of best practice order in some ways. But I have a mastering template, and which is like the basic chain that I have, which is like EQ and limiting effectively. But within EQ, I'll change it to one EQ to another, or TDR Nova, or then throw a compressor on it because I just want to tighten it up a bit, or solve another problem, or use, I don't know, the mid band of a multi-band compressor just to tame the vocals dynamics a little bit, or something like that. It's all relative to the material. Any last questions at all, guys? And of course, guys, I really, really appreciate you coming on. I hope it's useful to you. It's hard to teach mastering. It's hard to even explain what mastering is. So I thought this would be a good way to help familiarize people with at least my mastering process. I'm not saying my mastering process is right or wrong. It's my mastering process, but just to get an over-the-shoulder sort of view on what mastering looks like, because in this day and age, it's not as realistic as it used to be to intern at a studio and watch over someone's shoulder. We have to use new technology to solve new problems, and I thought this would be a good way to do it. But any feedback that you might have, please let me know. Hey Joel, no worries at all. You will be able to use the same link. You might want to give it an hour, but you'll be able to use the same link to watch the replay. But I will be sending out the replay link tomorrow for anyone else who might have missed it or missed some of it. So yeah, you'll be getting that. Otherwise, you can just use this same link, come back to it in half an hour's time, and you should be able to replay the whole thing. But I hope this just sheds light on what is considered a dark art, which to me isn't really a dark art. No worries, John. And as well, guys, if you have any friends who you think might benefit from this, might see value in this, like I said, I'm doing this on an invite-only basis at the moment because I don't want it to be, I don't want it to, because I might have technical issues or something like that at the moment, which I have been. But if you have any friends, just connect them with me. Something, whatever way makes sense to you, and I'll get them on the list. But I'm not necessarily like advertising this right now, but I'm going to like groups and stuff like that and saying, hey, get in touch, I'll add you to the list and stuff like that. But I did for a moment, for like a day, push it out, but then I was like, I don't really want to get loads of people on and then make too many mistakes and stuff like that, and then hinder the experience. But I appreciate your guys' patience hugely, because there have been a few kinks, and I think I'm about refining this process now of like inviting you in and stringing it out and stuff like that. But cool. I'm really glad that you guys find it interesting. Cool. So I'll close up the stream now. But you guys know where to get me if you have any questions. If you're not in the group, come into the Unlock Your Sound Facebook group as well. But otherwise, I'll see you next time, guys, and I'll push out the link tomorrow. So, cheers.